This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1027, a conversation with Mark Bagley.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. This is episode 1027. It's another conversation with Mark Bagley. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. Very excited to have Mark back on the show. If you've been listening to recent episodes, you'll know that he was just on the show in episode 1024. And on that episode, we talked a lot about his career, basically getting up to the early 2000s. So now we kind of, we take over and we keep going forward, although there's a lot of tangents. There's specific things that I really wanted to talk to Mark about certain projects he worked on, what it was like to work on them. This was an absolute thrill, once again, to have Mark on the show. We've talked about potentially, having him come back for creator commentary at some point in the future, or coming back again. But it was an absolute thrill to be able to sit down with Mark once more to talk about his career in comics and some of the amazing projects he's worked on. And I hope you really enjoy this episode. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Spotify, and technically it's on YouTube, and I'm not even sure what button I pressed. I think there's 2 episodes. I got automatically put onto YouTube. I think it's like Comic Shenanigans 3636 or something is technically the channel. It's one of those things where like I had Comic Shenanigans and as was one of my Gmail accounts, and at some point I had left it logged in when I started using YouTube, and so over the years it just became the default account that I used to interface with YouTube. So I watch all YouTube videos while I'm logged in as Comic Shenanigans, and not my like personal Gmail, which I don't use very much anyway. And then so at some point I think there was some sort of button to click that could link it and then post episodes, but it never worked, so I never really thought about it. And then recently I'm like, oh, there's 2 episodes of Comic Shenanigans on YouTube. That's super bizarre. So it's not like I put it up there on purpose. It doesn't look pretty. It's just got like a default, whatever on the screen, but it does have the audio. So if for whatever reason, if you're not as much a fan of listening to it on, whatever app you're listening to, you could listen to it there, which would be weird, but you can. I think there's been like 1 listen. Yay! So thanks to whoever listened to it once on YouTube. Not both videos, just one. But I appreciate them doing so. Before we get into the episode, Mark, looking forward to upcoming episodes. We have an episode with Michael Urey coming out, which will probably be in sometime in March, but I'm really excited about it. We had a great interview about Back Issue Magazine. He was already on the show in the past, but we got to chat even more about his recent book, as well as the last year and a half since we last talked about all the issues of Back Issue that came out during that period. It was a tremendous amount of fun to be able to chat with him about that. We have an episode coming up with Glenn Greenberg talking about Star Trek Untold Voyages, which was a lot of fun to do as well. So that comes out, that actually might be next week. We have a Book of the Month Club for February, probably coming out in 2 weeks. So a lot of fun stuff in the pipeline. So thanks again for listening to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. Oh, we have episodes with Pat Olive and Chuck Austin are supposed to be coming back in March. We've got hopefully Judd Winnick coming soon because there's a new Hilo release coming out soon. So excited to talk with him. So a lot of hopefully very exciting things coming up soon in the upcoming months. But without further ado, let's get right into why you're here. Let's jump into the conversation with Mark Bagley. Enjoy. Mark, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast.
Whatever.
It's a pleasure to have you back. I want to start with a question that I realized afterwards. I'm like, oh man, I didn't ask him about this because we were kind of going through the 90s period more or less chronologically, and I realized I missed something that I'm very curious about is what was it like, or what was the process of getting you involved to do an entire set of trading cards for Spider-Man? You did the entire set. A lot of them were linked up images, and I'm just curious from a creator's perspective what it was like to work on trading cards.
That set was pretty interesting. It was, they're all linked. They make one big image, when you put them all together, and because there's different like aspects of these are Spider-Man's powers, and these are Spider-Man's bad guys, and these are Spider-Man's, Yeah, I just said and I said I wasn't going to do that. Supporting cast, and they're all inked by different people, and to be honest, I have no memory of where that came from or how it came to be. I know that Bill Jemas was my editor of that because he's the one who became editor-in-chief at Marvel, or was that his title, or was it...
He was like a creative officer or something like that.
He was even bigger than that. It was, I forget. But he was the one who wanted me on Ultimate Spider-Man because of that trading card series.
Oh, really?
And I had a great time on the series. I've actually got the whole thing all like mounted together on the wall in my studio. And it makes a really nice piece of work. And the coloring is beautiful on it, and most of the inks look great.
No, I don't think I realized that. So there were different inkers on. I guess that makes sense, on different pieces that you did for the card series.
Yeah, each set of, was it 9? I guess I think each section was 9.
Yeah, it was 3x3.
3x3, and like one was inked by Adam Hughes, one was inked by Emberlin, one was inked by I couldn't even tell you how many different inkers there were. The Adam Hughes one was pretty cool. So
it seems like an interesting challenge, because it's one thing to have trading cards, right? But it definitely added something special in the idea that you really did need to get them all in order to be able to have this kind of linked up image. Was it like, how stressful was it for you, or maybe not stressful at all, to kind of lay out the images in a way that they would work together and they'd look cool together assembled, but also would still look good on their own, like cut up into individual pieces? I mean, we see this obviously with like linked up covers that go on, comics, etc. But this is a very specific animal in terms of the way it's constructed.
Well, as we speak, I'm walking into my studio to look at the piece to remind myself how linked together they were. Hang on, find light. Actually, the 9 large sections that were divided up 9 each don't interconnect. It's just each section of 9 interconnect. You know what I'm saying? And that wasn't that hard to do. I just gridded out a page and just added, random backgrounds into these characters. And some of them, I didn't even do that. It was just random characters and had different aspects of the character crossing into other cards so that they linked up. I'm looking at them now, and there's Adam, and there's Larry Molstad, and there's, I don't know who all else was doing it. But yeah, it was they came out looking really nice, and like I said, that apparently got my foot in the door for Ultimate Spider-Man.
It's funny, I don't think I've ever heard Bill Jemas referenced in any interview pre him and Joe taking over. Like, I think that's always where it's almost like in my mind, in the narrative, he just kind of emerges fully formed and becomes this entity with Joe running Marvel. But so it's interesting to me to even hear that his previous tenure, obviously he was around, but I'd never really thought of that before.
Yeah, living in Georgia, I don't get caught up in the minutia of who's running the company. It's kind of above my pay grade mostly. I just deal with the editors. In fact, I got flown up to New York, and I go to New York maybe once every 3 or 4 years, and back then maybe less than that. And I got flown up for, I think I was up there for, Comic Con or something, and I had lunch with Dan Buckley and Joe Quesada and a couple other guys. And I hadn't met Dan before. He's the publisher, right? And we're sitting at the table talking, rapping back and forth, and Dan goes, "You know something?" I said, "What's that?" "We've met before." I said, "We have?" He goes, "Yeah." He said, "Back in whatever, like 10 years before, I was your line stopper in San Diego Con."
Oh, really?
I went, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, I was a volunteer, and it was back in the 90s when lines was like insane." and I just said, and I just said, oh, was I nice to you? He goes, well, you're working for us, aren't you? But I remember that con. That was because I think I've done San Diego Con maybe 4 times, maybe 4 times, and that one was at the height of the collector's boom, and the whole things are going crazy. And I remember they had me set up for a panel, and it was just me, and there must have been 200 people in the room.
Oh, wow.
And they decided at the last second that they had to move me to a different room. And so they take me and they're walking me to this different room, and I'm being followed by like 200 people. It was so embarrassing. It was really kind of cool, but it was really kind of embarrassing.
Well, it just shows what kind of draw you were. Well,
Yes, exactly.
That was an that was an unfortunate pun, by the way.
I got that. The only other, I'm just going to ramble a little bit, but the only other con panel story I have, kind of like that one, was I was did I tell you the story about being in New Zealand and doing a panel just after the Star Wars guys?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so apparently not. So I'm in New Zealand.
I'm trying to think. I don't think he's told that one.
Okay, so I'm in New Zealand. New Zealand and Australia get together every year. They each have a convention a weekend apart, so that they can fly people in and to do each convention. They cooperate on that.
Oh, wow.
So they flew out, and so they had a panel with me, in New Zealand, and they had all the Star Wars guys there. I mean, they had David Prowse, they had guys like Chewbacca, they had all these guys, and they had a panel before me in this huge room, and there must have been 500 people in the room. And so they walked me up to the room, and the panel's still going on. It's got about another 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I'm talking to the guys that running the con, walking up there, and says, this is going to be really fucking embarrassing when the Star Wars guys get up and walk out, and 90% of these people leave, And the Star Wars guys got walked out, and nobody left. I mean, I'm looking at a room of about 500 people, and, it's New Zealand. There's nothing else to do, So it was kind of an ego boost. I had a good time with that. I'm pretty good on, when it comes to socializing and getting out of my comfort zone, I'm not very good at that sort of thing. I'm mostly a hermit when I'm home. But get me on a panel or get me out and that sort of thing, and I feel like I'm sort of putting on a show, so I'm not shy about that. So I had a good time. I told some stories, and
I think I saw that you're on the guest list for this year's Terrificon.
Yes, I am.
Is that your first Terrificon, or is this a repeat offense?
I think it's the third one I've done.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think so.
And
I'm not a casino guy, so it's like I don't even, it's just I show up and do what I do. But they got some good restaurants and stuff.
I guess I have to ask, when you go to these cons, like, are you just signing? Are you also doing sketches? Are you, working on stuff there? I mean, you're a busy guy already, and so adding on like a con appearance feels like a special occasion because you are such a busy guy. So what keeps you the busiest when you're at these cons?
It's changed over the years. Back in the day, you'd go to a con and you just basically sat and you just sketched your ass off. And I'm not organized enough to like take a bunch of sketches ahead of time and do them like a lot of the guys do, that sort of thing. I go to a con and I consider them sketches. That's why they're relatively inexpensive, and I'm not going to charge $1,000 for sitting at a con and doing a drawing, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you would just, to make any money at these things, you would have to just, as an artist, just grind it, guys would go back to their rooms, do sketches until 2 o'clock in the morning. Go again until 2 o'clock in the morning, and the only reason to do cons, meeting the fans is always very cool. They're always really nice, and it's usually a really great experience. But I would never do a con if I couldn't make any money at it, because I like being in my house, and it's a real social shock to be among that many people and traveling and all that stuff. It's not good. And back in the day, that's the only way you could really justify doing it, was sketching your ass off and signing autographs. Now, if you had told me 10 years ago I'd be able to charge for autographs, or they'd be paying me an appearance fee, or I'd have told you were nuts. I mean, I just would. I got into this business thinking I would make them, middle class income and do something pretty cool. And cons would always be like that. And over the years, it's really changed to where I held off charging for autographs for years. I mean, literally like 5 or 6 or 7 years after people really started charging. And finally got to the point where I got so fed up with people coming up with, 30 of the same book 4 times at a show that I had to do it, because people were coming up with long boxes, of the same comic, or of maybe 5 issues of the same comic. And my story about that, how I decided, what finally did it for me, was trying to figure, everybody does it a little bit different. And I decided, if you just want your comic signed, it's going to cost you $10. If you want it personalized, I'll do it for free. If it's being witnessed at CDC or something, it's $20. But if you come up to me with a long box and you want them all just signed for you, just signed, that's $10 each. I'll do your entire long box. I'm happy to do it. If you come to me with a long box and you want them all personalized, I'm happy to do that too. I think that way it keeps it honest. And there was this guy who would come to my table. I would see him at almost every show. Every show in the East Coast and in the Midwest. He would show. He's this little guy. You always remember the ones who annoy you. He would come to me 5 years ago at this show. I don't remember. If I remembered you, then you probably annoyed the shit out of me. And so this guy would come up at every show 2 or 3 times, and this is me bitching about, I'm so lucky to have people wanting my autograph. But the point is, he'd come up 3 or 4 times at every show with 20 of the same book, and I'd sign them. He'd come back, and I'd sign them. And when I finally decided to start charging, I had a sign made up, and it was on my table, and here's this guy. Shows up Friday at a show. Hey, Mark. And it sounded just like, hey, Mark. Says, hey. And he had 20 books or 15 books or whatever, and he goes, sign my books. And I said, yeah. And I said, look at the sign. He looks at the sign. He reads the sign, squints a little bit. He goes, and so it's $10 for non-personalized, and personalized is free. He squints a little bit, and he looks at me and goes, are you serious? And I looked at him and said, yeah. He gave me 1 book to sign. And I literally have not seen him since. Which just kind of just puts an exclamation point on that, And I never had anybody give me, maybe once, I've had somebody give me a hard time about charging for an autograph outside of that. I'm not a Nazi about it. If it's a 12-year-old kid and he's got 2 comics, I'm not going to charge the kid. I'm really Nazi about it, but it really does kind of make things a little bit more honest.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. For the people who are just flipping them, if they're making money off you, why can't you make money off it too?
Yeah, exactly. Not to mention the fact that. Anyway, let's move on to something a little more interesting.
Okay. Well, I hate to beat a dead horse, or maybe I don't. To go back to the trading cards, I'm curious which one that you thought was the most exciting to be able to draw. Like, some of them have the villains, some of them, as you said, it's just Spider-Man kind of doing different Spider things.
Let me walk back in the other room and look at them, and I'll tell you which one. I can't say off the top of my head.
That's fair.
I'm sitting in my sunroom having a beer, so you guys just have to forgive me. What we got here? Turn the light on. All right.
So I think I do have a personal favorite, but I'm curious what yours is.
Which one's your personal favorite?
Probably the one with all the different wacky transformations Spider-Man's had over the years.
Oh yeah. The 6-armed Spider-Man, and that one, and
you got Cosmic Spidey in there.
I don't really have a favorite. I really don't. I'm not a huge fan of Venom, so there's one with a whole bunch of different Venoms on it, I think, and it's fun drawing characters that I've never really drawn before. Like, I think the one here that's got Tombstone and a couple other guys I'd never drawn before.
Mm-hmm.
The Adam Hughes one is just interesting because Adam is such a terrific artist. Hardly looks like my artwork by the time he's done, but it looks better, so I don't give a shit.
Which one was that?
The one who's inked by Adam Hughes.
No, but what was the image?
Oh, the images. It's villains are also allies at some point, I guess. I think. I can't. I don't have my read on me, so I'm trying to see what. I don't think it's actually labeled. It's got Silver Sable with the Sandman.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And Night Watch. Oh God, Night Watch. Poke a dagger. I had a good. It was. I love drawing, so who cares? It's as long as it's not a real pain in the ass. I pretty much have a good time drawing almost anything.
That's a funny image, only because, as you said, like Nightwatch and Annex, like no one remembers who they are.
Right.
I mean, if they remember Nightwatch, they remember because he was in Maximum Carnage, and that's been reprinted a million times. But I don't think anyone knows who Annex is.
Amex? I don't even know who
Annex. Annex, exactly.
Is he one of the characters on those cards? I didn't even notice him.
Yeah, he's on the Adam Hughes one in the bottom right.
I'll have to go look at him again. Anyway, so we should move on. We're taking up a lot of time talking about this.
We are, yeah, that's true. Okay, here's a question I have. I'm curious, given the time period, you worked on Avengers 2, Wonder Man and Beast. I'm curious what it was like to work on that, because this was, again, in that period where you're on Thunderbolts, you haven't done Ultimate Spider-Man yet. I'm curious where Avengers 2 came from.
I have no idea. Somebody just called me and said, hey, would you do this Sports miniseries? And I always liked Wonder Woman. I always liked Wonder Man and the Beast as characters. At the time, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who was drawing Wonder Man at the time. He's a really good artist. I can't remember his name. Anyway, they said, hey, let's draw that. And I got to draw, Colossus or It or whatever his name is. And, it's a fairly forgettable story, but I was drawing it's pretty exaggerated. They actually did a collection just recently before. I hadn't seen them in years. They did a collection of, I think it's 4 issues. And they actually were pretty good. And I was doing really good hands at the time. The Beast has got these huge hands, and I was having fun with it. So I enjoyed drawing that a lot.
It's interesting because, again, I mean, up until you doing, obviously, X-Men in the last decade, you weren't thought of as a guy who's kind of touched the X-Men. You were more of a, Spider-Man, obviously, and then kind of Avengers-focused because you had Thunderbolts who were kind of in that same wheelhouse. So it's interesting seeing relatively early work of yours where you have a prominent mutant like that.
No, I just never put my foot in the X door. They never much called me, and to be honest, the X books are always so damn depressing.
Well, it's funny because when you did an X book, it was definitely a lighter, more fun X book compared to the rest of the line.
Well, it was an interesting experience. I'm not going to go into any more details than that. I had real problems on that book with the editor. I mean, real problems. And to the point where I got him fired, but we won't even talk about that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Happier things. This Avengers 2... Sorry, go ahead.
I look back at work, and, I was doing pretty good work. And the drawing and storytelling was all there and that sort of thing. But behind the scenes, there's shit going on that I'll tell you about it sometime personally, but at times I'm ending up screaming on the phone at this man of an editor. So... Anyway, we'll move on from that one.
Yeah, we will move on. The last note I'll put on the Avengers 2 miniseries. So in that one, the script was by Roger Stern. So I'm curious if you have any recollection of what a Roger Stern script looked like at that point in time, and what was it like to work with someone like Roger.
I do not remember. If it was full script or plot, I don't remember at all, to be honest with you. It's been too long.
So a more big picture question is, over the years, because obviously you've collaborated with so many different types of people, how many of them did you actually have kind of more direct conversations about the book? Like, obviously you get the script and you have an idea of what they want. How many of them did you maybe become a little bit more involved in some of the plotting, if ever, or having a little bit more of a dialogue about exactly what they wanted to make sure that it carried through in the book? Like, I would imagine, but maybe I'm wrong, that must have existed to a degree, at least, with Brian Michael Bendis.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah, but I most of the time, what the writer gives me to draw, I unless it's something that needs fixing, I just draw it. And if they ask me, I get this question, I start working with a writer, who do you want to draw? What do you want to draw? This sort of thing. And I'm always like, I don't care. Just give me a good story, because I don't think about it too far ahead. I get away from my desk and I don't think about it. I've always said that I think writers have the harder job. They got to sit up and they got to think this shit up out of the blue, deal with editorial, and imagine what's going to happen 6 months from now. I'm at my desk. I'm just thinking about what's in front of me. And when I'm away from my desk, I don't even really read comics much anymore unless there's an artist I'm interested in seeing what they're doing. The writer's incredibly interesting. I basically, maybe that makes me an art monkey. I don't know, but my job and how I feel about it is I'm there to tell that story and make it as good as I can make it. I'm a fairly educated guy. I've read a lot. And I'm fairly articulate, although you wouldn't know it from the amount of times I say I know. But the idea of writing, so I could write a story and come up with something and have it be published. But that isn't in my. I don't have the juice for that. I don't have the real interest in that. I was at a dinner with a couple of well-known artists, writers. Well, one was an artist-writer guy, and the other guy was basically an artist who had one thing published that he'd actually written. And the artist-writer, obviously I'm remaining nameless here, the artist-writer guy and the other guy had written one thing. He had like 40 miniseries that he'd written in his 30-year career. And they were going on about the fact that you weren't really a creator if you didn't write and draw. And they were just talking back and forth, not realizing how fucking offensive they were being, because that's just bullshit. And I'm a little pissed about that, to be honest with you. I want to be a storyteller visually, and that's what I do. You don't like it? You can kiss my ass.
We talked before about what it was kind of like to leave Thunderbolts and move on to other projects. That last issue that you did, issue 50, was always one that meant a lot to me when I was younger. There's something about it. You and Fabian really felt like you really hit a home run with that particular issue. And this is maybe a more emotional question that really doesn't have any place for it, but does you, when you leave a book and it's ending, like, do you have any thoughts about like, I'm not going to be able to draw this anymore, or it's not going to be mine, especially in a book like Thunderbolts where you launched it? But I guess you would have had this previously with New Orders as well. Like, you launched a book, you did really well with it, and now you're moving on. Is there an emotion to you when you're kind of doing that last issue, or is it easier for you to let go because you're excited about the next thing?
Yeah, it's more of the latter problem. Usually if I'm leaving a book, it's either for a bigger opportunity, because it is a job and a profession, and I want to be as out there and as relevant as I can be. So when I left New Warriors to do Spider-Man, I love New Warriors. I love working on Fabian. The book was a lot of fun to work on, team books are a pain in the ass and they're hard to do. But I was excited I was happy to leave it behind to do Spider-Man. And the same with Thunderbolts. When it was time to leave Thunderbolts to do Ultimate Spider-Man, well, I wasn't that excited because I didn't know how awesome it would be. But I'd done Thunderbolts for a long time, and I was getting ready to do something else. I don't remember what issue 50 was about, to be honest with you. So why was it that emotionally interesting to you?
There was just something about how Fabian wrote, like, it was the end of that current kind of run of Hawkeye had made everyone think on Thunderbolts that he had made this deal with the government, but there actually wasn't a deal. And he kind of bluffed his way through, hoping that he could make them into good guys and eventually get them this deal for clemency. And so it kind of wrapped up that storyline, but the only way to get them their clemency and their pardons was basically to surrender himself to the government because of some hijinks that Guyrick had been doing, Henry Peter Guyrick. So there's just
I vaguely remember that. Yeah, Thunderbolts was. I mean, Fabian is such a good writer, and there was so much going on all the time in that book that it pushed a lot of buttons, and it just made it interesting to read. So many of these books you read, and you just forget about what's going on. And Thunderbolts and New Warriors were both the kind of book where you read, and there was always so much going on that it was just interesting.
Now, in and around this time, or maybe a year later, again, you're doing Ultimate Spider-Man at this time, you did have a 4-issue quick stint on the FF, which was, I think at the time, I'm not even sure who actually wrote it, because a bunch of people's names are on it. There's Carl Kiesel's name is on it. There's Carlos Pacheco's name is on it. But what was it like to kind of pitch in and do those 4 issues?
I think Kiesel was writing it. He also inked me an issue or two. And I was just excited to be doing the Fantastic Four. It was a fun little storyline, but I don't really have that much more to say about it. It was just anytime I get a chance to do, especially at that time, to do, A-list characters that I had never done before, or maybe I've only done once before. Like, I had done one issue of the Fantastic Four before, and I'd drawn them in New Warriors, and I'd drawn them in other, maybe a shot here, a shot there. But to get a chance to do 4 issues of the Fantastic Four, it's like, okay, I'm doing the fucking Fantastic Four. I'm going to do the best I can at it. Mm-hmm. It was, I got to draw that season. That was fun. And there was, I think in that was where I did a page. It was Captain America was on a page with Bucky. It was a flashback to the Second World War. I could be wrong. Could be thinking that was something. Anyway, I did a page that had Captain America in the Second World War and Bucky on a motorcycle and that sort of thing. And I was at a convention somewhere, and Joe Simon was at the convention. And I was selling artwork. I had my original pages there, which I don't really do anymore at shows. And that page is on top. And it's not quite a splash page, but it's a really good-sized panel, like 3/4 page or 2/3 of the page. And Joe Simon's walking past my table, and he looks down, and he sees it, and he stops. And he picked it up, and he looks at it, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Did you draw this?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You do a really good Captain America." And I just man, my nipples got hard. It was like, I was so excited. That was very awesome to hear.
That's amazing.
Oh, yeah. It's been a couple of times in my career where that kind of thing has happened. I've just gone, wow,
So moving forward a few years, I shouldn't really go too far, but I mean, Ultimate Spider-Man is running along. One thing I'm curious about, and I think we kind of touched on it last time, but I'm curious to have you elaborate a little bit. Obviously, when you do Ultimate Spider-Man, it's a different Spider-Man. It's a younger guy, so obviously you adapt your visual language of Peter as Spider-Man. It's going to look different, feel different than the '90s version, who was a much more mature character. And we talked before how you keep coming back to Spider-Man over the decades. How is it harder to get back into doing adult Peter after having done, or like when you first did adult Peter after having done so much of Ultimate Spider-Man? Was it difficult to kind of get back into making him look like the 616 Spidey, for lack of a better term, and not the Ultimate anymore? No,
it was like putting on old slippers. It was just, I was so excited to be back on Amazing, kind of on an ongoing basis, just to see what I would do. And it was right in the middle of the whole. It was the beginning of the Sin Eater storyline, and there was who's the guy with the rags all over his face?
Kindred.
Kindred, right? No, and a lot of that storyline, it went on way too long. And I'm not criticizing the writer, I'm not criticizing the editor. It's just sometimes this sort of shit happens, but it just went on and on and on. And I drew the shit out of it. But that first issue, back drawing and reintroducing Sin Eater, and I was kind of on my game at the time. John Bell was inking it, and good God, he the living hell out of it. And I was just excited. And there's pages, I was looking at some of that stuff recently, and there's pages and panels in it that I'm as proud of as I have been of anything I've ever done. I mean, there's one scene where his character's driving this race car through, like, a street fair, street carnival or whatever. And I've got this panel where Spider-Man's running along the walls. You're looking down over him as he's running along the wall, chasing his car. And I look at that going, now that is good. I don't care who you are, that's good. And that doesn't happen very often when I'm drawing stuff. But, yeah, I was pretty pleased to be back on there. And, like I said, it was like putting on comfortable shoes because they are two totally different characters. And I felt like I'm drawing so much better now than I was when I was doing Amazing Spider-Man. I feel like I deserve to be drawing this guy again. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just me.
Now, in the mid to late 2000s, you take a journey over to the other side of the street. You go to DC. I'm very curious, one, how that kind of came about, but two, if there's anyone in comics that could do the work, the amount of work required for a book like Trinity, I think you're the only one on the list these days. Like in terms of speed, being able to do that many pages, because I think it was it 10 pages every week for 52 weeks?
It was 11 pages.
11 pages. Jeez, that's incredible. So how did, first of all, that seems like an insane assignment. So how do they even come to you and say, hey, we want you to leave Marvel, we want you to come over to DC, we're going to have you work on, all the big guys, that work on the Trinity, but it's going to be a weekly book. Like, what was that conversation even like?
Well, I've been an Ultimate Spider-Man forever, and my contract was coming up at Marvel, and you know how the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Marvel's always treated me really, really great, and I've never had any complaints, but it gotten to the point where I was hankering to kind of do some stuff, draw Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and that sort of thing. DC's got a lot of interesting characters. And when my contract came up, I'm not getting into detail, but I wasn't happy, and my wife with the offer. And in the interim, I've worked with Kurt Busiek a lot, and he and I on the side have been talking about stuff. And he had an idea for this book, Trinity, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, which I wanted to do. He'd love to have me draw it. My contract was coming up, and I wasn't going behind Marvel's back, like negotiating anything, but I kind of just decided between Kurt and I and myself that, I'm going to do it just to see. And Marvel keeps me, can we make you another offer? And I'm like, well, kind of. But, and I actually called Brian to ask him, what's the best way to, do this? I don't want to burn any bridges. I don't want to piss anybody off. Because a couple of guys just recently at that time had done just that. Walk away in the middle of a project halfway through a miniseries or, whatever. And I didn't want to do that. And so I was upfront about it. He said, call Joe. Just tell him that's what you're going to do and, that sort of thing. And so I did it. I went to D.C. and the idea was to draw Batman in this thing called Trinity. And we had a big writers' meeting with Kurt and Joe Quesada. Dan Buckley. Not Dan Buckley. What the hell?
Well, Mike Carlin was the editor, right?
Carlin was the editor. Who the hell's running DC?
Was it Levitz?
No.
DiDio. Oh, of course. Dan DiDio, yeah.
And I think Levitz may have been in the room, and the deal kind of took over the whole writers thing. And by the time he got done, it was, I don't blame Kurt or whatever, but it turned into everything but Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. And all of a sudden, Batman's a fucking god. And I was like, what the hell? I mean, it became this whole universe thing, and it wasn't anything like I wanted to do. But I did it, and I look at it, and I drew the crap out of it. But we had like a 6-month head start, maybe a 4-month head start. So by the time the first issue came out, I had 6 issues in the bag or 10 issues in the bag, something like that. But by the end of it, I was just grinding pages. And Kurt loves to throw everything in there but the kitchen sink. And we were coming down to the end of it, and it's a big final fight scenes and that sort of thing. And, I mean, I was turning around pages every 2 or 3 days. I was setting out just so that R.T. Bear could ink it. And I got the script for this issue. It was near the end of it. And Kurt called for this double-page spread, which involved, he just threw every DC villain in. I think it was like 84 characters or some fucking thing. And I just blew my top. I was so stressed out. I called Carl, and I love Mike. He's a great editor. And I just was like, what the fuck is... Because it was too late to rewrite it. It's too late to adapt it. But I was just pissed. And I'm not pissed. I wasn't pissed at Kurt. I was pissed at Kurt. But it was... So I can fucking draw this, but I can't draw it fucking well. Mm-hmm. You know? It's you can't do that. Turns out I actually drew it fairly well. It came out pretty good. Not the bone horn, but maybe I said blow off some steam. But it by the end of it, I was just burnt out. And like I said, it wasn't at all what I wanted it to be. But everybody worked their asses off on it. From Fabian to Kurt to, was it Scott McCloud? I think did the backup issues, and a couple other guys, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think McDaniel did a lot of backups, and I think Fabian wrote a bunch of them as well. And
yeah, Fabian wrote all the backup, all the last half. Kurt wrote the front half issue, and Fabian wrote the back half issue.
Have you ever reread it or like looked at it again?
I look at it every now. I look at everything every now and then. It's funny, you look at it, and sometimes you go, "Hey, that's pretty good. I did all right there." Other times you look at it, and you go, "Oh my God, what the hell is that?" But I put a lot of effort on there, you know, and there are things that I'm pretty proud of it as a piece because of the challenge that it was. But I was happy to move on, and I think I moved on from there. I did a couple issues of Batman, 3 or 4 issues of Batman, mm-hmm. which I really enjoyed, and then I did Justice League.
Before we get there, one last kind of thoughts on Trinity. So, how early, like when they're like, okay, you're going to work on this book. How quickly did it become a weekly? Was that like always on the plan? Or?
That was from the get-go. That was going to be, we're going to try this. Because they knew I was fast enough to do a book month. And really, being weekly was basically, and me doing half the book, it was really like doing a book a month. You know, or a bit more than that. But I knew it was going to be a grind. In fact, I negotiated my page rate higher because I knew that for the year that it was going to take me to do this, that I was going to just be my social life. What little social life I had was going out the window, and it was going to be a grind. And you know, like I said, there's not a whole lot of guys in the business who I think could have done it and got it all in on time, which I did. I'm pretty proud of that. Plus, I think I did some pretty good work. I don't care who thinks I didn't.
And as you said, you move on from that, and you get to do a few issues of Batman with Judd Winnick. What was it like? I mean, again, you got to be on this big book, but Trinity's not Batman. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not the Batman title. So how much significance did it have for you to be able to say, like, I'm actually drawing Batman in his own freaking book? Like, it's not another thing, it's Batman.
That was nice, but it wasn't even Batman. It was Dick Grayson as
True.
Batman.
Yeah.
You know, which was a little frustrating, but that was why. But I got to draw. The inking was, I don't remember who inked it. He was a little heavy-handed, but he was actually pretty darn good. The more interesting thing than drawing, Dick Grayson as, Batman was, I got to draw Two-Face and Kingpin and Clayface, and I had a great time doing that. And I think I did some pretty darn good work there, telling them the story.
It's interesting because I think your art is actually a good fit for Dick Grayson as Batman. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, given your history with very acrobatic and agile characters, you doing, a version of Batman who is more agile and more physical in that respect actually seemed like a really good fit at the time.
Yeah, my biggest influence for doing Batman is, Neil Adams, of course. And when I was doing Dick Grayson as Batman, that's what I was thinking. Because, Jim Lee does his version of Batman, and he's so thick and so solid and so heavy. And I just had a hard time wrapping my mind around doing it that way. But I think I could adapt myself to do them any way that needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I felt like I was competing against doing it at the time was Frank Wiley was the one who was doing the Batman book at the time. So he designed the Batmobile, and he had that influence on the book. And I was, in my head trying to make sure that somebody would look at this and go, "Oh, it looks like shit compared to Frank's," So I always have that sort of thing in my mind, like, okay, I don't want somebody looking at it going, so much the worse than what's his face was doing. So.
Actually, that brings up a different question of mine, which is actually going to jump us back to the 90s for a second. So don't get any whiplash as we go back in time. But a quick question would be, obviously, when you were doing the Spider-Man books, those books were feeding in and out of each other. So there was a lot of crossovers that were going on between them. And then when you're doing Thunderbolts, you had a few issues where you're crossing over with Avengers and, you're crossing over with George Perez issues.
Oh, I had a great time with that crossover.
So that was my question. Like, what's it like working on a book where you're kind of trading off with George Perez? And were you looking at his material as it was coming in as any reference point for your own, or were you just jazzed to be working on, the Avengers and Thunderbolts working together?
I don't remember if I was seeing George's stuff coming. I was reading comics at the time and reading George's stuff and seeing what he was doing on the Avengers. I just knew that I had to step my game up to be comparable with it. When I was doing Amazing Spider-Man and there was all these crossover books, I didn't really worry about it because I felt like I was on a par with everybody and maybe better than some, and in my own egotistical sort of way. But knowing that I was doing this crossover thing with George, I tried to step up my game a little bit. Funny thing about George is kind of off the track. Back before I even got into business, Marvel, I was in the Army when they came out. Marvel came out with some paperback books, which were basically comic stories, in paperback books. They had a couple illustrations. And George, one of the stories was an Ultron story. And so I took that and I adapted it into comic form. And that, like I said, I was early 20s. I think I did it while I was in the service, still in the service. It may have been after, but I think it was while I was still in the service. And the Avengers and Ultron fighting up in the air. And about a few years later, 3 or 4 years later, they took that story and they put it in the Avengers, and George drew it. I got George Perez fucking drawing this story. And I still hadn't broken into business, and this is getting to the point where I was getting ready to think about trying to break into business, because I was just, and it was kind of cool seeing it because we were telling the same story, and maybe I am getting this, because there are places where I've told the story. He goes, the storytelling is almost exactly the same. The final scene is Ultron's getting covered in molten adamantium and freezes in place. In that final page, where George draws that, panel for panel, our drawing is almost exactly the same. And just the storytelling, that's just the way to tell that. And that gave me the idea that maybe I know what I'm doing, learning what I'm doing, you know? Anyway, that was just, I always remember that as a moment in my life where I'm going, maybe I do have a chance of doing this someday.
And then you're doing a crossover with him.
And then and then there's this Avengers Thunderbolts crossover with, who's the guy who gets the Superman powers? The leader of the Maggie, I think.
Count Nefaria.
Yeah, Count Nefaria. And the costume is so cool. I mean, John Byrd's costume on that. We say what you will about John Byrd. That's a really cool costume. And drawing somebody with Superman level powers, at that point I had never really done before. I had a good time with that. And I got to draw the Black Widow, and I did my very best to not swipe, but to ape what Adam Hughes does with the Black Widow, because Adam Hughes is great. And I had a good time with it. Those 3 or 4 issues, whatever they were.
Now, when you're working, I'll jump back forward to to the, I guess, late.
You'll jump back forward.
Yep. That was a fun turn of phrase there. You do, as you mentioned before, you are working on Justice League of America. What was it like to, be able to draw the Justice League?
It was so fucking frustrating. For James Robinson, we got on the book, and there was a lot of flux and a lot of bullshit going on at DC in the background, which has been going on for years now, I guess. And they were doing the Blackest Night or the whatever storylines throughout all the books. So we got on the book, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to do the Justice League. Well, we couldn't use Superman because he was gone, so we were going to use Mon-El. We couldn't use Mon-El, so we ended up with Supergirl. We couldn't use Batman because he was gone, so we were using Dick Grayson. We couldn't use Wonder Woman because somewhere she was gone, couldn't be used, so we used Donna Troy. All these characters are good characters, but it wasn't the Justice League, you know? And then we had the blue guy with the diamond on his chest and a big fucking gorilla. And, and all that aside, all these characters could be done good, and James started writing the stories on, and then they came in, oh, by the way, you've got to shoehorn in this Blackest Night bullshit, which went throughout all the books and all this, and it was just miserable. I mean, it was tough for James, and it was, I was so frustrated because I really wanted to do the Justice League and do it prior, and I look back on it, some of those experiences that just wasn't as good as it could have been, I think. And like I said, once again, I tried to draw the shit out of a lot of it, and I did a pretty good job on some of it, but it wasn't the difference between that and working on Ultimate Spider-Man or working on Amazing or working on New Warriors or Thunderbolts is you love what you're working on. You love the actual product that you're putting out because the writer and you are happy, and the story is what you want to do. And this was not that. Neither one of us was happy. We're doing our job. We're doing the best we can with it, but we both know that this isn't what we want to do.
Mm-hmm. It's really too bad. Yeah, there were some really weird pockets in there where, yeah, as you said, like the Justice League couldn't use most of the members of the Justice League, or they were just used in different places, and it's unfortunate constraints to put on a creative team who are just trying to tell a good story. I think Dwayne McDuffie had the same kind of problem when he was writing the Justice League as well.
Yeah, well, DC's been messed up for a while, So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. And I don't blame anybody personally, It's just sometimes things are bigger than one person or 2 or 3 people can control, and it's just outside influences that make you put you in a situation where you got to deal with it and do the best you can with it. And that's sort of where we were on that book.
So what was it like coming back to Marvel? I mean, I think one of the big projects you worked on upon your return was Fear Itself, The Fearless, which was kind of a mini, I guess more of a maxi series that spun out of the Fear Itself event that had happened that previous summer. So what was it like coming back to Marvel?
Well, it was well, I actually came back to the Death of Spider-Man.
Of course. Yes, sorry.
And actually, I wasn't going to come back for that. Brian had called me, and this was back when we actually, people were talking on the phone back and forth. And he knew when my contract was coming up, and he really wanted me back and wanted to work with me again, which is awesome. And I was going to come back. He first pitched to me doing all new X-Men, which started and ended up doing with Brian.
Oh, yeah.
He pitched that to me, and that was the book I was going to come back on, and which would have been great. But then somewhere in the interim, I don't remember how what the timeline was. He said, "We have this new idea. We want to kill Ultimate Peter Parker, have it in this miniseries, and do this and this, and we want you to do it. It would be so great." I'm like, "That would be so great." And I think it was the 6th issue miniseries, something like it. And so I came back on that, and I had a blast. I mean, I had a can't remember the anchor's name. He's a well-known guy. I'm drawing a blank on his name. But Justin Ponzer was coloring it. Justin, God bless him, he passed a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Best thing, and takes your stuff and just elevates it to and the inking was amazing, and the story was great, and I just had a great time on that book, and I remember this day, the last issue where Peter dies, which Brian did bring him back. I'm really pissed at him about that, because he didn't talk to me about it. But when Peter dies, and he's laying there, he's in Aunt May's arms, and he looks up at her, and he's like, "I couldn't save Uncle Ben, but I could save you." My wife is out of town. She's always out of town. And I was talking to her over the phone, reading her and telling her about it, and I was reading her that part of the script, and I got verklempt. I mean, I got and I'm a guy, I got 5 brothers who beat me up all the time. I don't get verklempt. But it was so well written. He's so fucking good. Brian is so good. And I, like I said, I told you my last interview that sometimes you're on, sometimes you're not as on, sometimes you're really on.
Mm-hmm.
I was really on in that book, and the inking was great. And as a piece, it's some of the best work I think I've ever done.
You really do sell that emotional moment that you mentioned. Like, obviously, it sounds like it was on the page anyway. It was going to work, but you really sell it.
Well, thanks. I pull it out and look at it. And doing faces like that, you can overdo them, the emotional, and just have it not look right. And somehow I got those to look right. And then I got to do some of the, when they buried him, I forget what they called it, the aftermath or whatever. And there's a scene going into St. Peter's Cathedral, and it's Aunt May and Gwen Stacy's in the car with Tony Stark, and they're walking into St. Patrick's Cathedral. And as they're walking in, this little girl yells out to Aunt May, "Are you Spider-Man's mommy?" And Aunt May stops to talk to her, and she's a little girl, and she's got a hat on, she's got some little scars on her face, and there's a little boy standing next to them, and that little girl's my granddaughter. The whole scene is, Are you Peter? And Spider-Man's mom? He said, "No, I'm his aunt." But she would make lunches for him, and she goes, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, Spider-Man saved me from a fire when I was young." And I read that to that kind of just. So I made that little girl's my granddaughter, and to make her look sad and kind of serious. Patricia's a goof. I mean, she's a total goon. And my daughter threatened to cancel her birthday. She's taking reference pictures of PJ to get it right. And she says, "If you don't stop smiling, I'm going to cancel your birthday party," which I did not approve of. that scene was so great. And, you know, they've got my grandson's in there. My ex-son-in-law is there, and for some reason they colored him Latin, which we can never figure out why, because he's a pasty white guy. But it worked really good. But that was my re-intro back into Marvel, and it was a pretty good one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's well remembered and reprinted all the time.
And I appreciate those royalty checks.
So I'm curious, in and around this period, so I guess after you've worked on that, in 2012, we have the first Avengers movie coming out, and the Avengers at the time didn't quite resemble what the movie Avengers were, so now we get this new book, Avengers Assemble, gets launched with you and Brian. So what was it like to work on that project, given obviously the priority of Marvel at the time to really push a team of Avengers that look like the movie out into the foreground? What was it like to work on that project?
Well, they didn't have me make them look, like the movie at all. I mean...
No, but you're using those characters specifically as opposed to whoever was the Avengers at that time.
They've all been Avengers at one point or another. It wasn't like you weren't Thor and Iron Man and Hawkeye, the Black Widow, and, this is the one with the Zodiac guys.
Yeah.
And once again, inked like crazy, and Justin Ponzer colored it, and holy crap. But it was inked by Danny Nicky. I didn't, the only one I actually thought about the movie was Hawkeye. I didn't worry about that. I was just happy to be doing Thanos. Because I love drawing Thanos. It was just a good storyline, and had a good. Once again, it's one of these things where emotionally, it's not the Dark Knight or it's not the Watchmen or whatever. It's just something that I just love drawing stuff, and there was a lot of fun stuff to draw in this. I got to redesign the entire Zodiac group. Nobody's ever used those designs again. I thought I came with some pretty good shit there, but that's the nature of that beast.
What was it like? So when you're doing that book, I mean, you get to use, at that time, you bring back the Guardians of the Galaxy, because they'd only been, sorry, when I say bring back, that's kind of a misnomer. They'd have been off the table for maybe a year or two. Like, they had the whole kind of Annihilation saga happening in their own kind of pocket of the Marvel Universe, and suddenly the Guardians are going to be kind of brought back in this Avengers book, and you're kind of bringing them back, and you kind of redesign, or really repurpose an old design for Star-Lord. Was there any pushback from Marvel at that time about how you guys were going to portray the Guardians?
Not really. I mean, to be honest, where I am in the food chain, if there is pushback from above, I don't really hear about it. They've altered it before it gets to me. I know that Brian hated the helmet of the original Star, the helmet design that John Byrne did. He wanted me to try and do something different. I just kind of liked it, so I did the best I could to kind of adapt to it. I didn't know how amazing this is. This was before Guardians of the Galaxy came out. I didn't know how amazing that movie would do that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I just do the best I could. I just do know I do a terrible Rocket Raccoon. My Rocket Raccoon like that. It just does. It's kind of like my gorilla in the Justice League. I can't draw a gorilla in my damn life. I don't know what it is, but I just don't. But that whole storyline, once again, it was drawing Thanos, and actually had Jim Starlin tell me I'd do a really nice Thanos, which was really nice to hear. It wasn't really not as amazing as when Joe Simon told me I did Captain America, because Starlin and I are the same age. But it's like I got to do Thanos, and I got to do just some amazing characters, and I drew some big stuff there. The huge rocket ships crashing, and I'm just thinking about some of the storyline. So it was fun. Like I say, it was.
I always liked your take on the Olivia Coipel Thor costume. Always looked really good under your pencils.
Oh, thanks. That costume, I hate that guy. He's so damn good. And he's French, and he's good looking and tall, and I fucking hate him. He's just so good. And yeah, I love that costume. In fact, one thing about the costume was when I drew it, Danny Mickey inked it, and the first time I saw him inking it, the little, I guess it would be plates on his armor, he accentuated them so much that they looked clunky. So I actually called Danny, and Danny's like this terrific inker. I shouldn't tell him what to do, but I'm like, dude, it needs to be sleeker like this. And he's like, oh, I see what you're saying. And he was like, cool. But Copier was doing that Thor thing, which was just beautiful. And like I said, there are guys in this business where I look at them and I go, like a regular person doesn't do art looking at what I do. And I'm like, how do they fucking do that? Why are they so good? Copier is one of those guys. And I've met him a few times. He seems like a really good guy.
Now, moving on from there, you get to actually have your own run on the Fantastic Four. What was that like working with Fraction?
It was fun. I mean, it was combined with another Fantastic Four book being drawn by what's his face? I can't remember his name. Michael Allred.
Yeah.
And it's the Fantastic Four going on a road trip sort of thing. And I got to draw some really cool things. To be honest, it wasn't quite the superhero book I wanted it to be. It just wasn't. I got to do Blastar, and Blastar was amazing. But I would love to do it again, and maybe do something maybe a little more cosmic and a little bit more, I don't know, superhero-y.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess because it was more, as you said, kind of more adventuring as opposed to superheroing at that time.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of the whole Fantastic Four family stuff. I'm just not. I want to do the Fantastic Four. I don't care about the kids. I don't care about Dragon Man as a smart guy. All that stuff just bothers the shit out of me. It just does. So, I'm just not a huge fan. I try and draw. I love drawing little kids. I mean, I think I draw good children. There are guys who are terrific artists in this business who can't draw a child to save their lives. And they're fun to draw. There was a scene in one of the first issues, and that was the book that taught me how to draw that thing correctly, where I got to draw him often enough where I got to be good with my thing. As I say at conventions, I practiced a lot with my thing, and I got really good with my thing. But there's a scene in there where Sue is walking through their apartment at the Baxter Building and opens the door and sees one of the kids. I think it was the daughter, and she's asleep in bed, and her blanket's over, but she's sleeping with her butt in the air. Her knees are drawn up, and her face is to the right, and her butt's up in the air. That's exactly how my granddaughter was sleeping, like a week before. I'd taken a picture of it. She was just out cold, and I love drawing kids, so that kind of thing was fun to do, and I got to draw some really cool stuff in it. But like I said, I would love to do it just a pure Fantastic Four cosmic adventure, meeting Galactus or meeting, you know what I mean?
Hmm. Interesting. So I'm gonna jump ahead a little then, if you don't mind. A book that I absolutely loved was the work you did on Hulk with first Mark Waid and then Jerry Duggan. I'm hoping you had a good experience on that because I really like those pages.
Hated every second of it. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I was really pissed that Mark Waid had to leave so quick, and that was. In fact, I talked to Mark later, like maybe a year or so after he got off the book. And, why did you leave so fast? And it had nothing to do with. I said, did you not like? Because he and I had talked about working together, and been excited about the idea of working together. And he did like the first 2 or 3 issues, and then was gone. And I had no idea why, and it just really bothered the shit out of me. And I found out later why. It was totally not having anything to do with me. but they brought on Jerry Duggan.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Duggan, right? I worked with somebody. When you switch around so often, you kind of lose track. But yeah, Jerry Duggan, and I had a great time with him. Once again, I love drawing the Hulk, and that's the book that really taught me how to draw the Hulk. I was doing him pretty well in the Avengers, but every now and then I got to do a panel. I was drawing the Hulk from back in the day when he's got hair and he's tearing shit up, and he's the Hulk. And Mr. Green was cool, and I got into a fight with him about the mohawk. I don't want to draw him with that damn mohawk. I think guys with mohawks look like assholes. And they're like, no, it doesn't be a mohawk. It could be kind of. And then Brad Pitt came out in the movie Fury, the World War II movie.
Oh, yeah.
The Tank Man.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got kind of this mohawk cut of his hair, but it's not really a mohawk. It's kind of, there's shaved sides to. I went, that's the kind of look I'll go for. That I thought worked well. But there's panels in there that, I just had a great time trying to get abstract with how you draw the Hulk's power. The first issue crashes in on what's clearly North Korea and trashes a bunch of missiles and stuff like that. And there's like this huge double-page spread where all it is his fist and his arm coming down. And like I said, I had a terrific time with that. The cool thing about Jerry, we talked a few times. Jerry met me when he was like 5 years old at a convention.
Oh, really?
Yeah. How long have I been in this fucking business? I'm getting old. And he says, yeah. He says, you were at a convention, I don't know where. He says, I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I came to your table, and you were drawing a Wolverine sketch, and you asked me, do you know what I'm drawing? And I told you, and you told me how smart I was, and and that sort of thing. And that's, conversations like that are just the coolest conversations in the world, because it brings home how important you are to people. Even doing something as silly as drawing comic books, the fact that somebody remembers that as clear as it was yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
Is neat. So we had a great time on that book.
I had a great time reading it.
What did you like about it?
It was a ton of fun.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun.
To draw. We got to fight. You got to show the Hulk fighting so many other gamma-powered people.
Yeah.
So
some I'd heard of before, like the ones that were in the mint and gamma soldiers or whatever they were. But it was fun, and I got to draw She-Hulk, which I hadn't drawn before. And I didn't even know that Betty Brant was a Hulk. I was like, Betty Brant's a Hulk. Betty, she's a Hulk. I was a fan of Betty. Is it Betty Brant?
No, you're right. It was Betty Banner, or Betty Ross.
Betty Ross. Yeah.
Too many Bettys.
No, she's a Hulk. So.
That's right. She was. Well, it was. Well, I would imagine. Like, what is it like for you to keep it fresh for yourself when you have a variety of very, powered, gamma-powered superheroes fighting each other? How do you keep it fresh for yourself and kind of maybe come up with different visual language to interpret how each person uses their power in a different way, even though technically speaking it's the same subset? They're both superpowered and high durability, but how do you approach the challenge of making it still visually interesting when you have people with similar abilities fighting each and every issue, but you have different people with those powers? Like, how did you approach that challenge?
I just try and draw. And yeah, sometimes you reference it, you draw on a panel, you go, oh shit, I just drew that panel. When the Hulk's punching somebody into the ground and smashing their face, and you go back to a couple issues before, it says, I drew almost the exact same panel. You can't avoid it. You really can't. You just try and be aware of that and try to avoid it as much as you can. Early on in that run, when the Hulk was fighting the Abomination, that was a blast, and I got to do just these two guys going at it. And I was looking at some Alan Davis stuff when he was drawing, I think, the Avengers, and he had the Hulk. and he had a couple panels. It's like a couple of these panels are almost exactly what I'd drawn, the exact same sort of angle, and the exact same sort of punch, and the exact, because there's a lot. Sometimes there's just one way to do. There's just a cut, maybe not one way, but if you're trying to illustrate something, there's just a way that's probably the best way to do it. And every now and then, if you're going to do it that way, somebody else is going to do it the exact same way. I remember I did a splash page with Spider-Man and the Punisher. I forget what issue Spider-Man was, or maybe exactly where it was, but it was the Punisher and Spider-Man. Spider-Man's on a wall behind the Punisher. And like a month later, 3 weeks later, Jim Lee, it was an advertisement for something, whether it was for a miniseries or for something else. I don't remember exactly, but it was a Punisher and Spider-Man. And the Punisher is in a very similar position as I drew him, and the Spider-Man is almost the exact same figure that I drew. And he could not have seen it. It was too soon to, and there's no way in the world he would want to have to, copy me. But it was just a matter of, there's only so many ways you can draw something. And every now and then it's going to sync up with something else.
I'm going to jump past the X-Men because we already kind of briefly touched on them and how maybe it wasn't the most fun of an experience. So I want to jump past there. I'm curious, so when you had Donny Cates was kind of changing the game in terms of what could be done with Venom and his origins, you got to work on Venom First Host. I'm curious what it was like, because you're not, as you said, like not necessarily a huge fan of Venom. But you're so well. It's so funny, right? Because he may not be your favorite character visually to draw, but there's just something about your rendition that has become ingrained in so many people's memories that you were intertwined with Venom, even though you're not the creator. You're definitely one of the original kind of people who people think of when they think of Venom, whether you like it or not. So what's it like to be tied to that character?
Even if I'm not a huge fan of it, if the story's interesting and the situations are interesting, that's what I can still have a good time drawing it. And the First Host one, that one didn't do a whole lot for me. That was just an interesting story. I mean, I got to design, was it Sleeper? Is that his name?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I went through, you wouldn't believe how many different character designs I went through for him because I couldn't quite get a handle on what I wanted to do with it. But I think previously to that, I had done the one with Craven and the dinosaur people and that. And I think they called it Lethal Protector 2 or whatever. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Now I do. It took me a second to remember it.
And that was inked by John Dell, and I got to draw the mole people and these dinosaur guys and Craven. And I had a great time on that. It came out looking really, like I said, John Dell inked it, the coloring was terrific, and the storyline really appealed to me because I got to draw these really cool characters and lots of shadows and darkness because they're down in the sewer and that sort of thing. A lot of it does sometimes depend upon the atmosphere and the theme of what's going on. When I did do 2 or 3 different Venom miniseries all in a row for some reason. I did the one where he cuts his hand off. I can't remember what that one's called, but it's reintroducing Carnage, and it was. I had a good time with it. And like I said, I may not be a big fan of Venom as a character, and I do not get the whole ideas of Venom as a god and Carnage as a god and all that. I wish they wouldn't do that sort of thing. I kind of miss the old days when it was I miss the old days when Spider-Man could barely pick up a car and Carnage was just the kid of Venom and not some ultra dimensional deity or something. It's kind of sort of what he is now, I think.
Mm-hmm. It used to be a bit simpler, right? If you can call an alien symbiote going on to a serial killer simpler, I mean, yes, it was.
Yeah, life used to be simpler. What can I say? But
speaking
once again, it's tall.
of redesigning, I'm curious what kind of direction or what discussions there were with the redesign of Ben Reilly's Scarlet Spider costume when you launched that book with Peter David.
Oh God.
I feel like I just triggered flashbacks for you.
Hey, it's so hilarious as I did this redesign because I've never been a huge fan of the hoodie costume. I just haven't. And once I started getting to draw it, I got more of a fan of it because it just when you start drawing it, it's more interesting. I don't know why, but they kind of wanted a hoodie thing, but they didn't want the same costume, and so I came up with this costume, and I was pretty proud of it. That the first issue of that, the splash page where he's standing on the torch of the Statue of Liberty. It turns out he's in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
But you should see the inks on that. John Dell inked that, and it's like, oh my God, it looks so beautiful. But somebody very quickly pointed out the fact that this redesign of this costume, which I was pretty happy with, was almost the exact same costume I did for some stupid character called Spider-Side from back in the Clone Saga. And I looked at them like, oh my God, what the hell did I do? So I was trying to get rid of that pretty damn quick because I had no idea I'd done that.
That's funny. I don't think I'd even thought of it, to be honest. And I've read it and I've looked at it, and I guess it does look a lot like Spider-Side, but I hadn't really put it together myself. That's funny.
I had no idea. I just was like, oh my God. But that book I think I only did like 5 or 6 issues of or something like that, and they moved me off of it because there was stuff going on. C.B. Cebulski was taking over as editor-in-chief, and they did a lot of shifting around at the time. I was kind of happy to get off that book because Spider-Man not in New York, it just doesn't make any sense. You can go swing around Las Vegas for about 2 buildings and then you're in the desert. I mean, what are you going to do there?
Speaking of that costume, it did make an appearance in the recent Marvel Spider-Man 2 video game.
Oh, yeah? I didn't know that.
It's actually one of the relatively first costumes you unlock in the game. So my son and I both played that game, so I made sure to wear that costume.
Oh, cool. I did not know that.
Still didn't think it was Spider-Side, but, I'll let it slide. So I'm curious, so when we're moving forward in the timeline, we're getting closer and closer to modern day. We talked briefly last time about working on Life Story, which, again, I don't know if anyone thought it was going to hit the way it did, because I feel like it was a much bigger thing than maybe people thought it was going to be at first.
We talk about Deadpool first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that came before Life Story.
That's right. You're right.
And that's kind of an interesting story because it took me off of Scarlet Spider to do Deadpool. And it was going to be an ongoing, and I really didn't want to do Deadpool because guns are a pain in the ass to draw, and I've never felt comfortable drawing. It's hard drawing people holding guns, and it just is. I have a hard time with it. I've never been a huge fan of Deadpool. I don't know if I've ever read a Deadpool comic in my life. And I was writing that. I can't remember off the top of my head. I can't remember off the top of my head who's writing. But I started drawing it, and I had such a blast on that book. It was going to be an ongoing. And once again, John Dell was inking it, and the coloring was great, and the stories are fun. And I never realized how much fun I would have drawing Viscera. I mean, there was blood spurting everywhere, heads flying, and I had such a good time with that. And like I said, CB came in and there's all this stuff going on, and they turned it into just a miniseries. And I was really disappointed in that because I had a really good time with that book. I'm done talking about that.
Was it when you're doing Deadpool? Like, was it just being able to be feeling a little bit more unfettered, because I mean that is kind of the character, right? Like it's just this unfettered, unfiltered, I guess hero at times, anti-hero. And so obviously you've always done much more kind of straight edge characters for the most part. So you got to kind of tap into this darker, seedier side.
Yeah, it's exactly that. You almost feel guilty drawing some of this stuff. I really shouldn't be drawing this, and God, I hope my mom doesn't see it. But drawing limbs flying off and stabbing somebody in the head and having the actual something, it's something that's really great to leave stuff in the imagination, but it's also kind of fun to just be out there. I mean, there's one scene where they're in New Orleans and he's fighting these 4 or 5 redneck, inbred bad guys, and to come back as zombies, and he's just chopping half their heads off and doing all this. And you can't not love doing that. So I had a good time with it.
It was Colin Bunn who wrote it.
Colin Bunn, right. That's right, Colin. In fact, I drew him. One of the covers is Deadpool, and he's like being grabbed by 10 or 12. It's a fairly close-up image. Zombies being grabbed by all these different zombies. One of them is Cullen.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there he is. That's funny. I had not put that together either, but that's a really funny reference to build in there. That would be the cover issue number 4.
I do terrible likenesses, so you wouldn't have known if I hadn't told you.
I mean, we talked about you doing Star Trek. I mean, that worked out okay.
Yeah, we're not talking about that again, okay?
No. No, we're not. All right, so life story. You work with Chip Zdarsky. It hits, like, really, really strong. Like, everyone seemed to really gravitate towards that book. Your art is so gorgeous, and the fact that you get to really kind of adapt different eras, and your pencils are great throughout. It still feels like you're kind of adapting again to each period that you're kind of bringing to life. It's an enormous amount of fun. I think I said this last time. I think I own it 5 different ways because I have like the original singles. I have it in digital. I have it, in the trade paperback they had. And then you guys did that extra issue. So I needed the hardcover that had the extra issue. And then you did the softcover version of that. So I have that as well. So I own it a lot. So you're welcome for the royalties. But what was it like working on that with Chip? Because Chip is so much fun.
Because I work for Chip on Amazing some too. He's just a good writer. He visually tells good stories, and you're right. I had no idea how popular it would be. It did really, really well, and I had a great time. It's one of those things I really invested my heart into it. The coloring is great on that book, and Drew Hennessy and John swapped off inking details on it. And both of them are terrific, and it was fun. And there's some good emotional stuff in there when Peter and Mary Jane are fighting, and not getting along, and the kids showing up. I was really happy how that came out. The one thing, Chip, he kept calling for Peter to get fatter as he got older. He wanted to get thicker and thicker and older, and I'm like, man, he's still Spider-Man. He's hiding it, but he's still bouncing around in the background doing stuff. And I mean, I'm what am I? What 2000 and I'm 66 or 60. I can't remember right now. 66 or 67, and I'm not really fat. I look about the same as I looked about 20 years ago. I'm pretty solid. You don't have to get fatter and thicker as you get older. So I fought that some. I thickened him out, especially in that last issue when he's really an older guy, and I gave him kind of an older guy's physique. But a couple of the covers, Chip did the covers for that. And you can see it's kind of porky, and that's just Chip.
It's funny when you mention a Spider-Man that looks like that, it does bring to mind the Alex Ross version of Spider-Man that he designed for Earth X back in, 98 or so, because that was a paunchier version of Spider-Man who kind of let himself go a bit. So it kind of, that's the mental image I have, is maybe that's what Chip was originally wanting to go for. When you talk about the emotional beats of Life's Story, I mean, there's a lot of really great quieter moments that you use, but what I think really pushed it even further was the annual, or the extra issue that was all about J. Jonah Jameson, because that issue just really felt like it somehow took everything that made Life's Story great, and then you have this character who was there throughout in different areas and really kind of pushed his story to the forefront, and it somehow got even more emotional. I don't even know how that was possible, but there's just something so tragic about J. Jonah Jameson. So what was that like to portray his story in that annual?
It's just a really good story, and so if it's a really good story, it's really fun to draw it. And Jonah is he's almost a tragic character because he's just so wrecked by the idea of Spider-Man and so obsessed with it. And Chip illustrated that so well through it, especially the phone call when he's talking to his son while he's in prison, and then when Jonah calls Peter, Jonah's in jail, and he calls Peter to commiserate about Gwen dying, and he can't let it go that it's Spider-Man's fault. Chip just handled that really, really well. The whole idea of him taking over the spider costume, the Spider Slayer costume, and fighting the Scorpion. I don't even know if it needed that. I think there could have been a different way of ending it, which maybe would have been even more poignant. But in the interim, when you have the clone of Gwen showing up, and she's an older woman now, and knowing that Peter's Peter, and it's always interesting drawing stuff like that. And I love emotional moments, drawing more than fights anymore, more than punching back and forth. If you can give me something, I just working on an issue of Superior Spider-Man that I'm working on right now, and there's just this one page where Anna Maria, what's her face, the little person,
Marconi,
right? Well, she's in an old AIM base, and there's radiation, so she climbs into an old AIM costume, the yellow beehive costume that AIM guys wear, and it's so big on her because she's a little person. And it's just one little page of her climbing into this costume and then walking away, and it's just storytelling, and it just makes it just as fun to do. It's my favorite part of that issue. Not the fighting, not the Spider-Man splash page, which may make me a few $1,000s when I sell it, or whatever. This one little page where she's climbing into this costume, making it fit. It does it for me.
I'm curious, when you did come back to Amazing Spider-Man, you were during the Nick Spencer run. What was it like getting? Pardon me?
Spider-Man. I don't know if I'm coming back to Amazing Spider-Man. I think John's got that locked up right now.
No. I mean, when you did come back, when Nick Spencer was writing it,
right?
What was it like? Again, it's not like you haven't done Spider-Man before in many different ways, but obviously it's different when it's the flagship book. Like there is something different about Amazing Spider-Man. So when Nick Lowe kind of calls you about that, what was your take on it? Was it even a hesitation? Was it absolutely I'll do Spider-Man in the main book again, or what was your take on it?
I was excited. I was immediately, because I've been wanting to do it for a while, and it was just I was ready to do it. I've been making noises about working on it. So I was just ready to go, with both barrels blazing. And we had some discussion about making this my last Spider-Man. I don't remember. I don't want to get into that. But I was like, no, I don't want to close that door yet. I was just ready to get back on him and see what kind of job I could do compared to what I was doing back in the 90s. And I know people, there are people who love what I did in the 90s, and people love what I, but I'm drawing so much better now than I was then, that I just look at it now and I go, okay, now maybe I've earned the right to do this book,
So that does bring us up to like working with Dan Slott on, Ejectiveless Spider-Man and doing, a lot of the kind of Spider-Verse stuff in that first storyline. What is it like working with Dan? Like, Dan brings with him a lot of energy, a lot of big ideas. You get to really stretch yourself and bring a lot of different type of spider characters into the book. So was that an easy decision for you for like, yeah, let's collaborate, let's do this?
Oh, Dan and I have been talking about working together for a long time. In fact, I think Brian suggested us working together even a couple of years before that, but it hadn't worked out. And so they called me about working with Dan on doing this, the third act of this Spider-Verse storyline, and I was just totally down for it. One thing about working with Dan is don't call him on the phone because you can't get him off the fucking phone. He's a blast to talk to, but man, he gets going, and all of a sudden he's telling me about what's going on 3 issues from now. I was like, Dan, I don't want to know. I just because you tell me about it, and it just in my mind I'm like, I don't want to fucking do that. That just sounds like a pain in the ass. When you're drawing it, it's great, but just don't tell me about it. But the Spider-Verse stuff is, like I said, I haven't read a whole lot of comics in quite a while. So there was so much referencing I had to do and figuring out, and it was a lot of work. And that issue 7, where there are pages in that issue 7 that almost broke me. If you go back and look at them, where there are literally hundreds of characters, well, maybe not literally hundreds of characters, but it feels like it. There are pages in there where there's dozens and dozens and dozens of characters per page, and you just couldn't get around drawing. You just had to draw it. And by the end of that issue, I literally had to recover from that issue, and I've never had to do that before. It took me a month or two to really feel like I was able to get back in my game, because it wasn't that I was not enjoying drawing. It wasn't that I was not liking it. It was just, I was just freaking exhausted. And the stuff shows. I wish it could be printed without the coloring. The colors are good colors, but so much of it is small, little, delicate stuff. Mm-hmm. John Dell's inking it, and the line work is so fine that you just lose it, And
were you drawing on a standard board for like? I know specifically, like in that issue, it's not even a full splash, but it's a larger part of the page, and you have, as you said, like all these spider people kind of floating there. Were you doing it on a kind of a bigger page at that point, so you could get some more clarity, or no?
11 by 17.
Jesus.
Yeah, this is why I have 3 pair of glasses. Okay, I have got a pair of glasses. I've had LASIK like 3 times over the years. You get LASIK when you're in your 30s, because I started wearing glasses when I was like 7 years old. And in my late 20s, when I started making halfway decent money, I got LASIK so I could have 20/20 vision. And your eyes still keep changing. So 5 or 6 years later, 10 years after that, I had LASIK again. And now I'm at the stage where I don't have a LASIK again, but I've got a pair of glasses for distance. I can go without glasses for distance all day long. If I want to watch a movie, or if I want to look for street signs and that sort of thing, I put my distance glasses on, because it's that kind of. And then I have reading glasses for regular looking at my phone or reading on a tablet or whatever, reading glasses. Then I have my 3rd pair of glasses for when I'm working 9 inches from the page drawing. And they come in very handy with pages like that, because you're just drawing very small and very delicate, and you just need the help.
So I think I kind of glossed over this in our previous conversation, but you're still on the classic boards. You haven't gone digital?
No, No, I, 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 still draw straight on the board, and and I'm never going digital. I mean, I could see doing it for layouts and sketches and that sort of thing, because I do go through a lot of Xerox paper, because it's weird. I've kind of evolved, not even willingly, just sort of, it's just happened where back in the day, I would just sit down and I would do a little tiny thumbnail of a page, to lay out the panel kind of roughly, and just start drawing. And I would draw directly on the page and go from there. And over the years, it's gotten to the point where where I do a tighter rough, and then I adjusted some using my Xerox machine and blowing things up. I've become more and more dependent on it. And if I was doing that digitally, it'd probably be a bit cheaper, a bit easier to do. But when it comes to the actual drawing on the page, I mean, I've had this discussion with guys who work digitally before. When you get done drawing digitally, you've got a file. And when I'm done drawing on a board, and Drew inks it, or John inks it, or whoever else inks it, I end up with a page. And I got a page that I can put in my safe, I can gift, I can sell, and it's an intrinsic piece of artwork. Where a digital guy has got a file, which they put in their computer, and 5 years from now, 10 years from now, will they even be able to open it because the format has changed or whatever, And I don't understand that idea. I just don't. I get where laying pages out and doing sketching can really maybe speed you up. Although I've had this discussion with Dan Fraga, where you see these guys and they noodle and they noodle and they noodle on the actual layout of the page. They noodle and they noodle and they noodle it, and it takes them twice as long. Me, I pretty much sit down and I just do this little rough, and then boom, I'm on it. And it can be a crutch that slows you down and not speeds you up. But bottom line, original artwork, I've got a safe that's got a stack that's 2.5 feet thick of original artwork, which when I go is going to be my wife's or my daughter's. And a guy who works digitally doesn't have that.
No, they do not.
No, they do not. And if they don't realize, I think David Marquez, who I talked him into, at least I've heard this, that he's a full digital guy, but he does covers and splash pages practical because they're the real money, And I've started actually inking all my covers because I want to ink. I love inking. It's. I think did we talk about this last time?
We did, yeah.
It's just, okay, but bottom line, it's a profit thing as well as an art thing, and it's kind of nice to be able to do that. So I'm going to shut up now.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. I'm so appreciative for the amount of time you've taken out of your very busy life to chat with me about your career and all the books you've worked on. It's been a complete thrill. I don't think you're not necessarily the type of guy who would want to go through a specific older issue and do commentary of any kind, but if you were ever up for doing so, I would be more than happy to walk through that process with you, because there's just so much interesting stuff that you've worked on and so many decisions you've made in the art that I would love to chat with in further detail if you were ever so inclined.
Well, you think of something you really want to talk about, maybe we can.
I mean, I could probably come up with some stuff. So, if you give me the green light, I'm going to come back to you at some point.
All right, do that.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much. And obviously people can check you out on Superior Spider-Man right now. And actually, I guess as the closing question, what is it like working on that book? Because it's an interesting use of the IP of Superior Spider-Man. It's interesting. Obviously, you're using the current rendition of Dr. Octopus, which has been obviously tweaked recently with Ed McGuinness, etc.
Oh, fucking arms! Oh my god!
That was my next question.
Saw that the design for those arms. I started drawing those arms, and it's Ed McGuinness who designed them. And I called man. Sometimes you just want to punch an artist. And I love that. Ed's a good guy. He and I are friends. And it's like, I've told him to his face, you just want to punch him. Because those arms are a pain in the ass to draw anyway. Mm-hmm. You throw the little circular sucker things on those arms. It takes forever to draw those fucking things. And it's Jesus, you just want to kill him. But I'm having a good time with it. It's a pretty decent storyline. So, I'm not sure how long it's going on. I think it's a 7-issue arc, maybe an 8-issue arc, and then I'm not sure what's going on after that.
It's funny that, Dr. Octopus, for me, when I close my eyes, my favorite version of it is yours in the suit that Larson put him in. But your rendition of it has always kind of been the most true to me.
The actual wearing a suit with a tie?
Yeah, like the way you made it look. I'm trying to remember the storyline. I think it was Web of Death, right near issue 400 of Amazing Spider-Man. But your rendition of Doc Ock in those stories was so good, and I just really love that rendition. So, when I close my eyes, it's yours.
Well, it's funny my favorite version of Doc Ock growing up was when Gil Kane was drawing him, because Gil Kane added a lot of fluidity and curving and that sort of thing with the arms. It was just really amazingly done. And then John Byrne did an issue of Fantastic Four where Doc Ock is in it, and he's fighting with Mr. Fantastic, with Reed, and the arms are going everywhere. It's all these curves, and I've always got that in my head when I'm doing Doc Ock, because it has just this visual thing to do, and you can't really do that with the new version with all the stuff that Ed added. Thank you, Ed. But those are my inspirations for the way I do Doc Ock. But he was the first Spider-Man villain I ever drew professionally, because he was in the Marvel Trial Contest.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much, Mark, and I'll let you get back to your evening.
Well, it's 9:15, and I'm 66 years old. My evening's almost over.
Well, thank you for spending your entire night with me, then.
Well, good night, and it's nice talking to you.